It is of great value to the sick to have an even temperature in the room. This cannot always be correctly determined if left to the judgment of attendants, for they may not be the best judges of a right temperature. And some persons require more heat than others, and would be only comfortable in a room which to another would be uncomfortably warm. And if each of these are at liberty to arrange the fires to suit their ideas of the proper heat, the atmosphere in the sick room will be anything but regular. Sometimes it will be distressingly warm, but the patient at another time too cold, which will have a most injurious effect upon the sick. The friends of the sick or attendants who through anxiety and watching are deprived of sleep, and who are suddenly awakened in the night from sleep to attend to the sick room, are liable to chilliness. Such are not correct thermometers of the healthful temperatures of a sick room. These things may appear of small account, but they have very much to do with the recovery of the sick. In many instances, life has been periled by extreme exchanges of the temperatures in the sick room.
So very true. Cooler's better. Yes, Roger.
They took her serious. They invented air conditioning and thermostats.
Right. Very true. As you were reading, it's hard to know how to get the fire right. You know, when you build a fire, it gets warm quickly and can overheat before you realize it, and then it'll die down and get cold before you realize it. I mean, there's a lot of change if you're using fire. So yes, in our day and age, that's a little easier to control. But still, all too often, people want it to be warmer. And for a sick room, cooler would be better, and the patient be wrapped up in blankets. That way they're breathing a fresher, cooler air, which is more healthy for their body. Yes, Judy.
In pleasant weather, the sick in no case should be deprived of a full supply of fresh air. Their rooms may not always be so constructed as to allow the windows or doors open in their rooms without the draught coming directly upon them and exposing them to take cold. In such cases, windows and doors should be opened in an adjoining room, and thus let the fresh air enter the room occupied by the sick. Fresh air will prove more beneficial to the sick than medicine, and it is far more essential to them than their food. They will do better and recover sooner deprived of food than of fresh air.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Many invalids have been confined weeks and months in close rooms, shutting out the light and pure, invigorating air of heaven, as though all was a deadly enemy, when it was just the medicine the sick needed to make them well. The whole system was debilitated and diseased for want of air, and nature was sinking under the load of accumulating impurities. In addition to the fashionable poisons administered by physicians until she was overpowered and broke down in her efforts, her being the body, and the sick died, they might have lived. Heaven willed not their death. They died victims to their own ignorance and that of their friends, and the ignorance and deception of physicians who gave them fashionable poisons and would not allow them pure water to drink and fresh air to breathe, to invigorate the vital organs. purify the blood, and help nature in her task in overcoming the bad conditions of the system. These valuable remedies, which heaven has provided without money and without price, were cast aside and considered not only as worthless, but even as dangerous enemies, while poisons prescribed by the physicians were in blind confidence taken.
And we've been studying in weeks past about the medicines that were utilized in today's world are considered to be poisons. And so there's a lot of truth to what she's reading there. Yes, Roseanne.
Thousands have died for want of pure water and pure air who might have lived, and thousands of living invalids who are a burden to themselves and others think that their lives depend upon taking medicines from the doctors. They are continually guarding themselves against the air and avoiding the use of water. These blessings they need in order to become well. If they would become enlightened and let medicine alone and accustom themselves to outdoor exercise and to air in their houses, summer and winter, and use soft water for drinking and bathing purposes, they would be comparatively well and happy instead of dragging out a miserable existence. It is the duty of It is the duty of attendants and nurses in the sick room to have a special care of their own health, especially in critical cases of fever and consumption. One person should not be kept closely confined to the sick room. It is safer to have 2 or 3 to depend upon, who are careful and understanding nurses, and these changing and sharing the care and confinement of the sick room. Each should have exercise in the open air as often as possible. This is important to sickbed attendants, especially if the friends of the sick are among that class who continue to regard air, if admitted into the sick room, as an enemy and will not allow the windows raised or the doors opened. The sick and the attendants are in this case compelled to breathe the poisonous atmosphere from day to day because of the inexcusable ignorance of the friends of the sick.
So breathing those same airs may make them sick as well, which is the precaution.
What is soft water?
It's some water from wells are minerals, have a lot of minerals in them, and it makes it a hard water. And it,
Sulfur.
yep, there are a lot of different chemicals, but there's a difference in, around here the water is not as soft as some other places. And so a lot of people buy a water filter that is salt treated, and so it reduces the harsh elements in it. I've lived in a few houses that had a salt system as far as their water purification. But I don't know how to describe it except it's the mineralization in the water that makes it a harder water. Up north, particularly, the water's more hard. If you go to the beach and take a bath and it doesn't seem like you can rinse the soap off, that is soft water. You know, it's a variable relative to the mineralization in the water. Do you want to keep reading, Roseanne, or are you going to stop here? Whichever. I mean.
In very many cases, the attendants are ignorant of the wants of the system and the relation which the breathing of fresh air sustains to health, and the life-destroying influence of inhaling the diseased air of sick room. In this case, the life of the sick is endangered, and the attendants themselves are liable to take on diseases and lose health and perhaps life. This was the days before they really understood
True.
Contaminated air.
Yes, exactly right. And so often now we have filtered air, but sometimes it's not the same as fresh air.
Yeah.
Most times it's not. You know, you're taking out some of those contaminants, but the air is still not refreshed, even though it's been filtered. And so that's not always the best thing. Yes, Bob?
Is this on?
Yeah.
The industry that I'm in, there are mandates about the amount of fresh air, and in classrooms, in buildings, and the standard has increased. And as that rate increased, owners were concerned about the energy costs that were increasing because of having to bring in outside air. So now there's a market. It's called a dedicated outdoor, a DOAS unit, and it brings that air in at a space neutral condition. It's a pretty expensive piece of equipment, but anyway, that industry, that people recognize, you have to have that fresh air.
That's right.
Pastor, I've got a filter with UVC light that circulates the air in a certain size room, and that is supposed to be very good at purifying the
To
air.
stimulate and purify the air. Okay.
But it's not a matter of putting oxygen into the air.
Right. Okay. Roger.
You remember several years ago, there's Legionnaire's disease. Legionnaire's disease came about from circulated air in hotels that did not have enough fresh air introduced into the system, and the poisons circulated through the whole system in the hotel.
Yeah. So fresh air, good air is a good thing to have. All right. Roger, you want to start on this side then?
If attendants are awake to the subject of health and realize the necessity of ventilation for their own benefit as well as that of the patient, and the relatives as well as the sick oppose the admission of air and light into the sick room, the attendants should have no scruples of conscience in leaving the sick room. They should feel themselves released from their obligations to the sick. It is not the duty of one or more to risk the liability of incurring disease and endangering their lives by breathing a poisonous atmosphere. If the sick will fall a victim to their own erroneous ideas and will shut out of the room the most essential of heaven's blessings, let them do so, but not at the peril of those who ought to live. The mother, from a sense of duty, has left her family to administer in the sick room, where pure air was not allowed to enter, and has become sick by inhaling the diseased atmosphere, which affected her whole system. After a period of much suffering, she has died, leaving her children motherless. The sick who shared the sympathy and unselfish care of this mother recovered, but neither the sick nor the friends of the sick understood that precious life was sacrificed because of their ignorance of the relationship with which pure air sustains to health. Neither did they feel responsibility in regard to the stricken flock, left without the tender mother's care. Mothers sometimes permit their daughters to take care of the sick in ill-ventilated rooms, and as a result have had to nurse them through a period of sickness. Because of the mother's anxiety and care for her child, she has been made sick, and frequently one or both have died, or been left with broken constitutions, or made suffering invalids for life. There is a lamentable catalog of evils which have their origin in the sick room, from which the pure air of heaven is excluded. All who breathe this poisonous atmosphere violate the laws of their being and must suffer the penalty. I'd like to comment something here. If we do go back to the day and age that she wrote this information, we find a high mortality rate among 30-somethings and children.
Right.
And we don't see it today. But these conditions she's describing are not common conditions today either.
Right. Very true.
So the numbers definitely supported what she was saying at that time.
Yeah. Very, very true.
The sick, as a general thing, are taxed with too many visitors and callers. We chat with them, wear them by introducing different topics of conversation when they need quiet, and undisturbed rest. Many have made themselves sick by overtaxing their strength. Their exhausted energies compel them to cease labor. They are brought to a bed of suffering. Rest, freedom from care, light, pure air, pure water, spare diet are all they need to make them well. It is a mistaken kindness that leads so many out of the courtesy to visit the sick. Often have they spent a sleepless, suffering night after receiving visitors. They have been more or less excited, and the reaction has been too great for their already debilitated energies. And as a result of these fashionable calls, they have been brought into very dangerous conditions, and lives have been sacrificed for the want of a thoughtful prudence.
This is something I carry out when I visit people in the hospital or a nursing home or at home sometimes, is my visits are only 15 minutes or less, because they're there for a reason, and the reason is not to sit and talk to me. And if I walk into the room and they're asleep, if you happen to be there, this will be why. I don't wake them up, because you don't know how many times they woke up during the night because the nurses came in to check on them and whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. And so if somebody's asleep, I'll stand there beside their bed. I will have prayer with them. They may not realize it, but I will not wake them up just to say, hi, I'm here, you know. And so to me, this was an important little paragraph to say, you know, we don't go in there to visit and wear them out. I mean, they need to rest. And so, you know, if you're in the hospital and I come visit you and you're sleeping, I may leave a card or I may not, but anyway, I'm not going to wake you up because there's a reason for your sleeping. Okay, go ahead.
It is sometimes gratifying to the sick to be visited and to know that friends have not forgotten them in their affliction. But although these visits may have been gratifying, in very many instances, these fashionable calls have turned the scale when the invalid was recovering, and the balance has borne down to death. Those who cannot make themselves useful should be cautious in regard to visiting the sick. If they can do no good, they may do harm, but the sick should not be neglected. They should have the best of care and the sympathy of friends and relatives. Much harm has resulted to the sick from the universal custom of having watchers, nights. In critical cases, this may be necessary, but it is often the case that more harm is done the sick by this practice than good. It has been the custom to shut out the air from the sick room. The atmosphere of such rooms, to say the least, is very impure, which greatly aggravates the condition of the sick. In addition to this, to have one or two watchers to use up the little vital air which may find its way to the sick room through the crevices of doors and windows, is taking from them this vitality and leaving them more debilitated than they would have been had they been left to themselves. The evil does not end here. Even one watcher will make more or less less stir, which disturbs the sick. But where there are two watchers, they often converse together, sometimes aloud, but more frequently in whispered tones, which is far more trying and exciting to the nerves of the sick than talking aloud. Many suffering, wakeful nights are endured by the sick because of watchers. If they were left alone without a light, knowing that all were at rest, they could much better compose themselves to sleep, and in the morning they would awake refreshed. Every breath of vital air in the sick room is of the greatest value. Although many of the sick are very ignorant on this point, they feel very much depressed and do not know what the matter is. A draught of pure air through their room would have a happy, invigorating influence upon them.
Interesting. Don't breathe their air. And don't talk, even if they're trying to sleep. Okay. Bob.
But if they are afraid of air and shut themselves away from this blessing, the little that is allowed to reach them would not be consumed by watchers or lamplight. Attendants upon the sick should, if possible, lead them to quiet and rest through the night while they occupy a room adjoining. All unnecessary noise and excitement should be avoided in the sick room, and the whole house should be kept as quiet as possible. Ignorance, forgetfulness, and recklessness have caused the death of many who might have lived had they received proper care from judicious, thoughtful attendants. The doors should be open and shut with great care, and the attendant should be unhurried, calm, and self-powered.
This paragraph is interesting. If you've ever been in a hospital, how many times do the nurses come in where the door's open and they're talking all up and down the hall and things are happening everywhere? You know, you cannot get rest. Exactly. Anyway, I thought that paragraph was very insightful to hospitalization in the rooms and the noises and all the things going on. Okay, go ahead.
The sick room, if possible, should have a draft of air through it day and night. The draft should not come directly upon the invalid. While burning fevers are raging, there is but little danger of taking cold, but a special care is needful when the crisis comes and fever is passing away. Then constant watching may be necessary to keep vitality in the system. The sick must have pure, invigorating air. If no other way can be devised, the sick, if possible, should be removed to another room and another bed, while the sick room, the bed, and bedding are being purified by ventilation. If those who are well need the blessing of light and air and need to observe habits of cleanliness in order to remain well, the sick are in still greater need of them in proportion to their debilitated condition. A great amount of suffering might be saved if all would labor to prevent disease by strictly obeying the laws of health. Strict habits of cleanliness should be observed. Many, while well, will not take the trouble to keep in a healthy condition. They neglect personal cleanliness and are not careful to keep their clothing pure. Impurities are constantly and imperceptibly passing from the body through the pores, and if the surface of the skin is not kept in a healthy condition, the system is burdened with impure matter. Excuse me. If the clothing worn is not often washed and frequently aired, it becomes filthy with impurities which are thrown off from the body by sensible and insensible perspiration. And if the garments worn are not frequently cleansed from these impurities, the pores of the skin absorb again the waste matter thrown off. The impurities of the body, if not allowed to escape, are taken back into the blood and forced upon the internal organs. Nature, to relieve herself of poisonous impurities, makes an effort to free the system, which often produces fevers and what is termed disease. But even then, if those who are afflicted would assist nature in her efforts by the use of pure, soft water, much suffering would be prevented. But many, instead of doing this and seeking to remove the poisonous matter from the system, take a more deadly poison into the system to remove a poison already there.
Modern medicine. Roger.
Where's the balance here? Where's the line drawn? She's saying that when a person has a fever, this is God's method of the body purifying itself.
Mm-hmm.
And yet medically, if you're running a fever, well, take an aspirin or an
reduce it.
ibuprofen
Right.
or something else. Where's the line drawn? As I think sometimes we medicate ourselves and slow down the healing.
That's probably very true. That we do, through medicines, slow down the healing process, as opposed to what she's proclaiming or suggesting is the natural of fresh air, fresh water, cleanliness, changing your sheets. I mean, if you've had a sweaty, feverish night, change the sheets the next day. I mean, there's lots of things that would add to the healing process, but we sometimes miss out on that. Go ahead, Roger.
So is 103 livable? I mean, I guess there comes a point in time it gets temperature so high you can get in other problems too. But
that would be true. Ask the nurse. Or a nurse over here.
I'm not a nurse.
Oh, yes.
Well, when I had COVID, my fever went up above 103, and I didn't take anything, and I survived it. So I think that the body is still working on getting rid of that thing. But if you are concerned that there could be a problem with overheating the brain, then you can use cool cloths to the head.
Yeah. Or a tepid bath, or drinking cool water. I mean, there's lots of things you can do to alter your body temperature. Open the windows and breathe fresh air. I mean, cooler air. There's things to do. You don't want to create a chill while you're having a fever, but at the same time, if you would cover yourself and allow the air to be breathed, then it would make a difference in the temperature. More?
No.
Okay. Well,
No, I was going to tell you, in 1980, I had Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and I waited too late because I had visited my grandmother who had the flu, and I thought that's what I had. So when I did go to the doctor, he asked me about the spots on me, and I hadn't even noticed them. But he said it had already started breaking down the platelets in my red blood cells. So we drove to Rex Hospital, and I was admitted, and they pumped antibiotics into me. They didn't know what I had, so they put me in isolation. But my fever was right at between 103 and 104 the whole time. They changed my sheets 6 times during the night, just coming out,
Right.
and I was drained, but that was, all that infection and stuff working out.
Right.
It's just amazing how the body, in that case, I did have some, fluids coming in, but
Right.
don't want to ever go through that.
But you're right, it's hard to have a line drawn in medications and not medications. I mean, trying to probably stay away from them as much as possible, but still there may be a time when it's applicable. I'm not a doctor, so I can't advise in that relationship, but I just say natural is probably better than some other means a lot of times anyway.
Pastor,
Yes,
children's fevers can spike pretty quickly.
yes,
And I think that we need to be careful. We don't need to over-medicate, but
sure,
if there's any risk, we need to
that's
be
true,
careful
right,
with them.
very, very true. All right, John, you want to read?
If every family realized the beneficial results of thorough cleanliness, they would make special efforts to remove every impurity from their persons and from their houses, and would extend their efforts to their premises. Many suffer decayed vegetable matter to remain about their premises. They are not awake to the influence of these things. There is constantly arising from these decaying substances an effluvia that is poisoning the air. By inhaling the impure air, the blood is poisoned, the lungs become affected, and the whole system is diseased. Disease of almost every description will be caused by inhaling the atmosphere affected by these decaying substances.
So don't have your compost bin right underneath your bedroom window.
Yeah, it's called methane.
Anyway, or sleep underneath the cows in the wintertime like they used to do in the north for the heat that the cows would produce. Yeah. The cows would be housed underneath the rooms of the house. And anyway, there can be problems associated with that. Okay, go ahead.
Families have been afflicted with fevers, some have died, and the remaining portions of the family circle have always murmured against their Maker because of their distressing bereavements, when the sole cause of their sickness and death has been the result of their own carelessness. The impurities about their own premises have brought upon the contagious disease and the sad afflictions which they charge upon God. Every family that prizes health should cleanse their houses and the premises of all decaying substances. God commanded that the children of Israel should in no case allow impurities of their person or of their clothing. Those who had any personal uncleanliness were shut out of the camp until evening, and then were required to cleanse themselves and their clothing before they could enter the camp. Also, they were commanded of God to have no impurities upon their premises within a great distance of the encampment, lest the Lord should pass by and see their uncleanness.
All right. Yeah, one more paragraph maybe.
Okay. In regard to cleanliness, God requires no less of his people now than he did of ancient Israel. A neglect of cleanliness will induce disease. Sickness and premature death do not come without a cause. Stubborn fevers and violent diseases have prevailed in neighborhoods and towns that have formerly been considered healthy, and some have died, while others have been left with broken constitutions to the crippled with disease for life. In many instances, their own yards contain the agent of destruction, which sent forth deadly poison into the atmosphere to be inhaled by the family and the neighborhood. The slackness and recklessness sometimes witnessed is beastly, and the ignorance of the results of each of such things upon health is astonishing. Such places should be purified, especially in summer, by lime or ash, or by daily burial with earth.
All right. So your compost bins need to be turned every once in a while. Okay. All right. Jeff, I'll start. You and Doria.
Some houses furnished, is that it?
Yep.
Okay. Some houses are furnished expensively, more to gratify pride and to receive visitors than for comfort. Convenience and health of the family. The best rooms are kept dark, the light and air are shut out, lest the light of heaven may injure the rich furniture, fade the carpets, or tarnish the picture frames. When visitors are permitted to be seated in these precious rooms, they are in danger of taking cold because of the cellar-like atmosphere pervading them. Parlor chambers and bedrooms are kept closed in the same manner for the same reason, and whoever occupies these beds, which have not been freely exposed to light and air, do so at the expense of health and often even life itself. Rooms that are not exposed to light and air become damp. Beds and bedding gather dampness, and the atmosphere in these rooms is poisonous because it has not been purified by light and air. Various diseases have been brought on by sleeping in these fashionable, health-destroying apartments. Every family that prizes health above the empty applause of fashionable visitors will have a circulation of air and an abundance of light through every apartment of their houses for several hours each day. But many will follow fashion so closely that they become slaves to it, and it would suffer sickness and even death, rather than be out of fashion. They will reap that which they have sown. They will live fashionably and suffer with diseases as a result, be doctored with fashionable poisons, and die fashionable deaths. Sleeping rooms especially should be well ventilated and the atmosphere made healthy by light and air. Blinds should be left open several hours each day, the curtains put aside, and the room thoroughly aired. Nothing should remain, even for a short time, which would destroy the purity of the atmosphere. Many families suffer with sore throats, lung disease, and liver complaints brought upon themselves by their own course of action. Their sleeping rooms are small and unfit to sleep in for one night, but they occupy the small apartments for weeks and months and years. They keep their windows and doors closed, fearing that they would take cold if there was a crevice open to let air in. They breathe the same air over and over until it becomes impregnated with poisonous impurities and waste matters thrown off from their bodies through the lungs and through the pores of the skin. Such can test the matter and be convinced of unhealthy air in their closed rooms by entering them after they have remained a while in the open air. Then they can have some idea of impurities they've conveyed to the blood through the inhalation of the lungs. Those who thus abuse their health must suffer with disease. All should regard light and air as among heaven's most precious blessings. They should not shut out these blessings as though they were enemies. Sleeping apartments should be large and so arranged as to have circulation of air through them day and night. Those who have excluded the air from the sleeping room should commence to change their course immediately. They should let in air by degrees and increase its circulation until they can bear it winter and summer with no danger of taking cold.
The lungs, in order to be healthy, must have pure air.
All right, so it's interesting, the ideas of circulation and air and free air. Yes.
Two thoughts. First of all, we're blessed in our present generation. Most windows in modern houses are UV treated.
Mm-hmm.
So ultraviolet rays from the sun don't fade the carpet and the furniture in modern houses.
Right.
But you need the sunshine with this warmth. And as I say, the old fade factor is really not a viable excuse in today's modern houses.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is there's a misconception among many people. Where do you get a cold? Well, from going out in the cold.
In the cold.
And that's malarkey.
Right.
It has nothing to do with temperature.
Right.
I also find it interesting. You'd think that doctors would be some of the sickest people in the world because of all the diseases that
They
come through
treat.
their office,
Mhm.
and they treat. And yet, ironically, most doctors don't get sick.
Yep.
They build immunity. And they're living with this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, we tend to run and hide.
True. Doria?
Those who have not had a free circulation of air in the rooms through the night generally awake feeling exhausted, feverish, and know not the cause. It was air, vital air, that the whole system required, but which it could not obtain. Upon rising in the morning, most persons would be benefited by taking a sponge bath or, if more agreeable, a hand bath with merely a wash bowl of water. This will remove impurities from the skin. Then the clothing should be removed piece by piece from the bed and exposed to the air. The windows should be opened and the blinds fastened back, and the air left to circulate freely for several hours, if not all day, through the sleeping apartments. In this manner, the bed and clothing will become thoroughly aired, and the impurities will be removed from the room. Shade trees and shrubbery too close and dense around the house are unhealthy, for they prevent a free circulation of air and prevent the rays of the sun from shining sufficiently through. In consequence of this, a dampness gathers in the house. Especially in wet seasons, the sleeping rooms become damp, and those who sleep in the beds are troubled with rheumatism, neuralgia, and lung complaints, which generally end in consumption. Numerous shade trees cast off many leaves, which, if not immediately removed, decay and poison the atmosphere. A yard beautified with scattering trees and some shrubbery at a proper distance from the house has a happy, cheerful influence upon the family, and if well taken care of, will prove no injury to health. Dwellings, if possible, should be built upon high and dry ground. If a house be built where water settles around it, remaining for a time and then drying away, a poisonous miasma arises, and fever and ague, I don't know what that is, and fever and ague, sore throat, lung diseases, and fevers will be the result. Many have expected that God will keep them from sickness merely because they have asked Him to do so, but God did not regard their prayers because their faith was not made perfect by works. God will not work a miracle to keep those from sickness who have no care for themselves, but are continually violating the laws of health and make no efforts to prevent disease. When we do all we can on our part to have health, then may we expect that the blessed results will follow, and we can ask God in faith to bless our efforts for the preservation of health. He will then answer our prayer. He will then answer our prayer if His name can be glorified thereby. but let all understand that they have a work to do. God will not work in a miraculous manner to preserve the health of persons who are taking a sure course to make themselves sick by their careless inattention to the loss of health.
So, to rephrase that last sentence, God helps those who help themselves.
It says ague is it's malaria or some other illness involving fever and shivering.
Okay, all right. Thank you. All right. So, air is good for you. Breathe it. If it's clean and fresh, and it's better than if it's not. Anyway, any other thoughts to share?
Actually, I got one.
Yes.
I'm wondering if making the bed every day is not such a good thing. Maybe leaving the bedding down so the sheets get that fresh air instead of my head. Can talk to the wife about that.
That was easy. Leave
Yeah.
it open at least
All
till
right,
things
now we
dry.
got a consensus here. Don't make your bed.
Pull it back so that it gets air on it.
Well, that's what the pastor said.
Yeah,
I have a tendency not to make it as soon as I get up.
yeah.
You know, leaving it open so it does air a little bit.
Me too. I usually wait till I get yelled at. You too?
But anyway, but
It's a man thing.
but
Well, now you've got ammunition.
another good thing is, at least it happens at our house, is the sheets get put on the line outside to dry, and the sunshine and the fresh air, and that's a renewing of that cleanliness, so to speak. Anyway,
That smell, you can't.
of course, we wash them first and then put them out to dry. We just take them off the bed and hang them out there. Anyway,
It's called solar clothes drying.
that's right, exactly. Saves on the power bill. Right. All righty. Any other thoughts? Okay. Prayers? Anything on your hearts, minds for prayer?
My
Yes.
nephew is in the hospital. He's in a real low place mentally since he
Okay.
lost his wife, and
Right.
he needs our prayers.
His name's Adam. He lost his wife a few months ago, and it's really been hard on him. And so we need to remember him in prayer. Yes?
Roy Cawhorn in Maryland
Okay.
needs our prayers. Roy he wasn't feeling well, his knees, he just didn't feel strong. He likes to get out and ride his bike, but without going into a whole lot of detail, I don't need to, but his wife, Marilyn, is really, really going downhill. And he's discouraged, and he needs our prayers just to help him feel better and help him be able to handle, you know, it's
What may come.
kind of overwhelming.
Okay.
I just wanted to share a praise. As most of you know, my tool shop storage building, it's a 12 by 32, and it floated off in the flood. Probably 500 feet away, came to rest at an angle with one edge down in a small stream. And the Lord blessed this week. The tool shop is now back where it belongs on my property.
Amen.
I can tell you, there was many answers to prayer yesterday, and just to briefly state, Jonathan brought his machine, but he was afraid it was too small to handle that much load. So Fred Boothby had a bigger when we brought it on site. And between the two machines, we got it off the bank, down into the riverbed, or the stream bed, and then lifted one end up to drag it over the bank. And we were doing pretty good. Got it about 100 feet away from its resting place, and it started breaking off runners. It was built with four by 6 runners underneath of it. Could be skidded like a sled, but the runners started breaking, and the guy came to pick up the big machine. We didn't know what the solution was, but God had it figured out beforehand. Robert Carney yesterday left home to come here to work, and he said, "Do I need my skid steer?" And he couldn't think of why he should need it, but he brought it with forks. Oftentimes use a bucket, but it had forks. And when we got stranded 100 feet away, Jonathan called Robert, and Robert said, "I've got the machine on my trailer, and I can be there in 15 minutes. And he came in, and with that machine lifted one end, while Jonathan could push with his machine from the other end, and we're now in place. I just thank the Lord for, this is the stuff that you have to wing it, and sometimes it's a pile of junk you've got left, and sometimes it's salvageable. And we're going to give the Lord praise no matter what the outcome, but the angels of heaven were on duty yesterday, and God was leading and impressing people before we even knew to ask.
Amen.
Thank you,
Amen.
Lord.
God's hand working. I thought I saw somebody on this side. Okay. Any other thought?
Terry Vance, has anybody heard how she's doing?
All righty. Well, for those on Zoom, if you want to unmute and talk with each other and have prayer, that would be great. We can kneel together here and have our prayer time as well.